Hey everybody, this is Gary with ATVTorture.com. We're here today to discuss the installation of the Dakota Digital UTV-1500 gauge. This gauge has a lot of features, some standard features are what's typically found with your OEM gauge, and that's your speedometer, tach, uh, 4x4 engine indicators, your fuel levels. One thing this also goes a step further and provides with an optional sensor pack, oil pressure, and water temp. Another thing we liked about the gauge is the fact that we could look at our voltage from the battery when running auxiliary equipment such as a winch or other auxiliary lighting. This gauge basically replaces the stock OEM gauge and uses the same connectors that the OEM gauge uses, with the addition of the sensor package plug. Um, Best thing about it is it's easy to see, has great sunlight readability, and it comes with a 2-year warranty covering any manufacturer's defects. To begin installing the gauge, it's relatively simple and it literally takes you less than 5 minutes under most circumstances. But it's easy as simply uh, pop out the OEM gauge from the dash, and to do that, you just simply reach in behind the dash, push on it, and wiggle back and forth the OEM gauge, and just pull it out. It'll have a couple wires attached to it. Um, you'll unplug those wires, cable harnesses, and free the OEM gauge from the factory cable harnesses. You may need to wiggle them back and forth. They do have some O-ring seals to keep water and debris out of it. Next, you want to get the Dakota Digital UTV 1500 gauge, and you basically plug it in to the same locations that the OEM gauge came unplugged from. It's pretty simple. As you can see, everything is made with billet aluminum material and is heavy duty for extreme abuse out on the trail. You also have a little red clip you want to plug back in there. Make sure that stays in there, and that kind of keeps the gauge in the main gauge harness plugged in. There is a notch you'll index the gauge with, so you won't have to worry about getting it crooked or getting the horizontal line of the gauge off center. Next, you'll have two keepers and some little thumb screws, and you'll reach in behind the dash and you'll screw them onto these posts right here. Pretty simple. Like I said, it takes about 5 minutes or less to install this gauge. And once everything is, you do have make sure the O-ring on the gauge is in place, and then begin tightening down the thumb screws. And you have two, one on each side, left and right, and you pull those in, kind of push in on the gauge some, and snug them, snug down the thumb screws, and it'll be nice and tight. Once all that's complete, you can wiggle back and forth. Make sure that the seal's making good contact. You're not trying to keep water out because it is a sealed unit. So that's the good thing. You don't have to worry about getting any water debris if you're one of the type of people who like going through mud holes in the mudding scene. Then this gauge will give you exactly what you need. This is a little better than what the OEM gauge is. The OEM gauge will let water in if you're not careful. So, if for those that are using this, it's got some great features that it is built to withstand some of the harshest environments. Once that's complete, we'll start the ignition and test. During the installation instructions, the manufacturer recommends that you disconnect the battery before installing the gauge. We did that the first time. We recommend that you do disconnect the battery and reconnect it. That way it saves any kind of spike in electricity from damaging the gauge during the plugging and unplugging process. Now you turn the gauge on, you'll notice it's got some vibrant blue LED readout that gives you RPM, speed, time, different settings, much like using the button on the OEM gauge. It advances through the different fields, RPMs and such. So as you can see here, we'll get you a different angle on the UTV-1500 Dakota gauge here in just a second. Once started, as you can see here, you can see the display a little bit better. It really lights up. It's a really good looking gauge. You'll attract a lot of attention with this gauge and the different things it'll do. And just you can see on the outer rim of the gauge, the RPM level raises, lowers, and you can also set it in through different settings. You actually see it get the RPM reading in a 4-digit type display. Another thing that's nice is it shows you the gear shift indicator. So whatever gear you're in, shows you right there in different colors. So you can look at it quick glance, tells you what gear you're in. Does a lot of things the OEM gauge did, and more. It does a lot more. If you have any questions on the UTV-1500 gauge, you can visit Dakota Digital at www.dakotadigital.com and get more information and some specifications on the UTV-1500. Thanks. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope it helps. Bye.